good. I'm happy to hear. So we can have a meaty conversation.
We'll see. But I've been listening to your podcast and your teachings, well, before you had a podcast, for forever. Like when I first got introduced to Tibetan Buddhism, because I
Oh,
came
really?
from the Zen tradition,
Oh,
and one
wow.
of my friends like, "Oh, you got to hear this this nun, Robina," and I was like, "Okay."
Okay.
And it was all about baking cakes and everything, and I was like, "This is very talking about Dharma in ways I'd never heard." I was like, "This is wonderful."
Okay. I mean, this is the thing, I think, isn't it? This is yeah, anyway, that's good. Kind of, yeah, we have to, yes, we have to, and this is where my influence is Lama Yeshe, of course. He's
Yeah.
our, I always joke and say Lama Yeshe was born a hippie, but he kind of pretended to be a Tibetan because he
Yeah.
talked like a modern Western person. And the more we hear these classical Tibetan teachers, we can see that they're literally talking as they did in the medieval times. I mean, this
Mhm.
is why their system is so intact. But somehow Lama had this amazing ability to bring it down to earth. So I'm his daughter. So, I had to. I mean, I'm Lama Zopa's daughter too, but somehow, bringing it down to earth, I find is incredibly important, isn't it, Jason?
Yeah.
Jason, yeah.
Yeah. So Lama Yeshe was one of the first. So he was already had passed by the time I got into Tibetan Buddhism, but
Oh, well, I see. Yes, of course. Yes.
all of his texts and everything really resonated with me.
Yeah,
Like he was like, I read everything and listened to everything I could get my hands on from him in the
yeah.
beginning.
Amazing. Good,
Amazing.
Bryce. So who's your main teacher? I mean, I asked just out of interest. Your main lamas. You have main lamas? You found your lamas or?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So of course I've studied. I've spent a lot of time in Dharamshala receiving teachings from His Holiness.
Right.
But as far as like one-on-one teachings, a Drupan Rinpoche in the Drikung Kagyu lineage is the one who took me
Your
through.
lama. Okay, amazing. I don't know where's he's alive still. He's around. No.
Yeah, he's around. So he was at Zhangchubling in Dehradun, and then he was now he's down in Florida. He has a center.
Oh, wonderful. Good.
Yeah, he's close with Garchen Rinpoche. Do you know his?
Okay. Yes, I do indeed. Yes.
Yeah,
Wonderful.
yeah,
You've got a center there, or you just teach from there? What are you doing, Dayton?
yeah. Right now, I'm teaching, so I teach Tai Chi and then Dharma to a small
Oh,
group of
good.
people.
Wonderful. Good on
I go
you.
and see my Lama. I was just down there a few months ago.
Wonderful.
I did a
Good.
retreat.
Well
Yeah,
done, Bryson. Happy to meet you.
yeah. Happy to meet you.
Okay.
So this idea of the hippie Dharma is something always close to my heart. I love the history and I love that era and how
Yes.
the Dharma came through
Yes.
this. So you're one of these trailblazers. If you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit of that story with us.
Well, I mean, yeah, okay. Well, yes. I mean, we all kind of the thing, yeah, I suppose it was in the 60s, really. I didn't meet the Dharma until the 70s, mid 70s. I was about 31 at the time. I mean, my own path was actually, brought up as a Catholic. And I always, since the time I first went to Mass, I somehow always just knew that was my path. I was going to be a priest as far as I was concerned, not the altar boy, the priest.
Yeah.
I like the boss. It just seemed it was like a self-evident truth. I went home and announced it so happily I was going to be a priest. Of course, they all laughed. You're not a boy, you can't be a priest. I think I was so young, I didn't even understand intellectually. I just knew I was going to be a priest, right? So they said I had to be a nun. So I figured, oh, all right. So anyway, I mean, sort of my life, I was brought up as a Catholic and went to Catholic school. And I had this relationship with God from the very beginning. I never thought of him as my creator. So I think I was a Buddhist all the time. But it was, in a way, I'm grateful to have this Catholic upbringing because of all the saints and the imagery and the power, the concept of God. And it feels in some ways similar to Tibetan Buddhism, the devotional aspect, it's kind of interesting. So, I mean, I was completely immersed in God, but externally, I was the naughtiest girl on the planet. I was 7 kids in the family. I was always in trouble. I was rebellious, completely proud and arrogant, did what I wanted, outrageous, but I had this kind of relationship with God I just assumed this was the way everybody was. I loved all the saints and I was 12. Then I was at the same time, I was naughty, but at the same time, I was also in love with God and I was on my knees begging my mother to let me be a nun. Like, I don't know if you know the Catholic saints, but there's a little saint called Saint Therese of Lisieux. She was this holy little saint at the age of 14 becoming a nun. And she was my total hero. So I remember my mother, I cried when she said, no, you can't be a nun. And then I joke about it that 20 years later, when I told her I'd be a Buddhist nun, she cried. Anyway, this process for me was, I mean, I'm not trying to sound noble, but in my life, the process was trying to find the truth. I wanted freedom and I wanted truth. So I was into happiness. And then when I was 19, I decided I'd try sex and drugs and give up God because you can't have both. So I tried that. And then went to London and became this kind of radical lefty and demonstrating and being arrested at demonstrations and then black politics and then feminist politics. Really, I mean, without saying the words, looking for the truth, but it was very clear I was looking for a way to see the world, So after about 10 years, I wanted a spiritual path again. And then I bumped into Lama Yeshe and Lama Zopa. That were my first teachings, actually, when I was about 31. So a year and a half later, went to Kopan and became a nun. And so that's the essence of the first part of my life. And the second part of my life since then, I've been this, doing this. So that's the essence for me of how I got to this path.
Yeah, I think the Catholic thing, so I was also raised Catholic, the idea with all the saints and everything,
Yeah.
I think it's a great foundation for
Oh, it
Western.
is absolutely. It was very nourishing because I
Mhm.
mean, it's our internal world, and we can see, isn't it? I think if we're Tibetan Buddhists and we have confidence in gurus and things, really that faith and devotion is exactly the same. The difference is it's for the Buddha and the guru as the manifestation of the Buddha in the human form, which is just like Jesus for God in human form, isn't it? So it nourishes the heart in just the same way. I find that I was very happy to have that, right? That nourishing my heart, this yearning and aspiration to be like that, And that's
Yeah,
very much the basis, absolutely.
yeah. So, um, that's interesting though that you say you did the other sort of, hippie leftist things and left God. I sort of always looked to Kerouac and sort of had those blended.
Yeah, I see. That's interesting. Well, I know that I think, yeah, I mean, you can look for the truth in different ways. You can go the philosophical way, you can go the scientific way, and that's common in our world. But I didn't go that way. I went the political way. I wanted action. I was kind of dynamic and angry type person. So I saw the world and saw there was suffering. Well, actually, the first step for me really was the very powerful first step was my mother was a classical musician, right? And she taught us singing. So we brought up in the 50s. I was born in the mid 40s. So then I came along, Elvis came along and kind of blew up, blows your brain. But we were not allowed to listen to Elvis because my mother's a classical musician. She wouldn't let us be tainted by Elvis. But I remember we loved to listen to Elvis. But when I was 14 or 15, a powerful shift for me was at one of our school convent. We had these yearly fairs, and everything was for sale. I remember buying that you buy things. I remember buying this 7-inch LP. I never had money, 5 cents, and it said Billie Holiday, and I wondered who he was, but somehow I was compelled to buy it. And then that was introduced me to Black American music, which of course blew my mind because it's an opening to a whole new world, a world of kind of human experience and suffering, which I was hungry for. I mean, I was brought up in little kind of white Melbourne. I don't think I even met a Jew. I remember one girl at our school had a Jewish name. Her name was Feinberg, and we heard, oh my gosh, she's Jewish. I never saw a black person. We saw a few Italians and Greeks, but mostly it was white English world I was brought up in. So hearing this music, because music was part of my thing, it blew my mind and then opened me up to James Baldwin and all that kind of literature. And that was the starting point for me that eventually manifested in like maybe 10 years later. Yeah, when I was 10 years later, when I was in London, went to London when I was 23 and in the right and ready for revolution. So first it was kind of lefty politics, and then right at the time, late 60s, early 70s, right at the time of all the Black Panthers, and that whole kind of movement. That was when I was really when my mind was ready for I wanted to understand suffering, why there was suffering, and what the causes were. So of course, all those years, the causes were the other people. You blame the outside world. I joke and I say when I was a Catholic, I blamed all, the wrong people were the non-Catholics. And then when I was a hippie, you blame all the straight people. And when I was a kind of radical lefty, you blame all the rich people. And then I got into black politics, you blame the white people. Then I became a feminist, and then you blame the male people. I was always looking for a group of people to blame, which is what we do. So I'd exhausted all options, I think, of who to blame for the outside world suffering. And then at that point, my mind was ripe and ready for something spiritual again. And I've been doing martial arts also. That I tried that was very powerful for me. And then I broke my foot. So, and I was convinced it was Lama Yeshe getting in the way because I was going in the wrong direction. And so I was in this restaurant devastated. I'd stopped my karate career. I used to train 6 days a week because I'm always fanatic. I do everything fanatically. And I saw this poster and it said Lama Yeshe. So this when I met the lamas, So I'd been stopped in my tracks by this fellow running over my foot. So that's when I met the lamas. And then it sort of fell into place. It's as if all my years up until then with my apprenticeship, fell into the laps of Lama Zopa and Lama Yeshe. And that was when I was about 30. That's about nearly 50 years ago.
That's one. I think, this idea, like you said, you were opened up like Billie Holiday, this music,
Yes. Yes.
these whole other world is it's just like Dharma, isn't it? You see this like, what is this? And it takes you into a whole new dimension. And
That's right.
there's the same kind of yearning there. And then what you called fanaticism, like, we do everything to the full tilt. I've had people call me military Buddhist before. But
What? Say it again, what?
I've had people call me a military or a
No,
marine
that's right. I know it's wonderful to be. I mean, I remember people always talk about Buddhism. People talk about balance. I thought bugger, as we say in Australia, bugger balance. Who wants a balance? I mean, Lama Zopa, one of my teachers, is this total fanatic bodhisattva. That's not balance, honey. That's 100% love and compassion and wisdom. You're not balance. I mean, it's a boring balance. John, fanatic, great, go for it. That's how you the ones who achieve things. Okay, as long as it's based on good ethics, then we're okay.
I heard there was a saying Milarepa says like don't too little or too like we want balance, too little, too less, but it's better to err on the side of too more, do too
There
much.
you go. I like that. That's good.
Yeah. So how did you meet Lama Yeshe? So okay, you're doing karate, and what happened?
I was in karate, and I was really, 10 years of strong, the hippie, communist, lefty, blah, 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 looking for a way to see the world. And it was ticking off the boxes, really eliminating, wasn't that, it wasn't this, it wasn't that, looking for the way, looking for the causes of suffering. Really, I think that was the way to put it. And I'd exhausted all these options. And then I started martial arts, which was sort of the beginning of going internal. That was really powerful for me.
Mm.
And then I think I stopped in my tracks by this car accident, and I saw this poster. And I wouldn't have had the space in my head to go to this meditation course if I'd been doing my karate, because that was my emphasis. So I had nothing else to do. So I went to this meditation course. It was 1976, which was about the second, I think. They'd come to Australia in 74. The first time they went, they started at Kopan. Lama Zopa Lama Yeshe started at Kopan. Well, actually, yeah, they met when Lama Zopa, when they both came into exile. They'd both been into different parts of Tibet. Lama Zopa's a Sherpa, but they met in about 69 or something, and then they came to Kathmandu. No, earlier than that. Sorry, 59. And then in 69 they went to Kathmandu, and that's when the hippies started coming from the West, looking for revolution, looking for enlightenment and drugs. Why ever we saw the two to come together, I do not know, but looking for drugs and enlightenment. So it coincided with the Tibetans coming. So that was in the first courses started at Kopan Monastery, 69, 70, 71, I think. So then they started traveling. For the first year they traveled to the West was 74, because all their students coming to these annual courses were from the West. And they came to the West for the first time, or traveled around the world in 74. And I met them in 76. So that was just the beginnings of this organization, And so then I fell into their lap, basically. I wasn't looking for teachers, but I fell into their lap, really. It was 1 month intensive Lam Rim course from Lama Zopa. And then teachings and a retreat, Chenrezig Guru Yoga retreat with Lama Yeshe, my second month. So that was it. It was clear to me, and I was ready for that. It came at the time, and my mind was ready. I didn't, I wanted happiness, but I didn't want to have that in a relationship. I didn't want to have that with drugs any longer. Given up sex, given up drugs, given up alcohol, given up cigarettes. And I fell into their lap. What else? I thought, aha, here's the nun I want to be. Finally, I found it, So a year later, went to Kopan and got ordained. So I forgot your question. I'm raving on here. I forgot your question. What would you say?
That's the question. When did you meet Lama Yeshe?
So then it was Lama and Rinpoche together in this 2 months intensive time at Chenrezig Institute in Australia, the first
You
centre
were in Australia.
In Australia, yeah. The first of their centres in the West. That was when I met them, and it was clear my mind was ready. The timing was perfect, My mind was ready. I knew this was my path. It was quite intense and quite shocking, because I'd been on this intensive kind of political activist path for 10 years, and radical feminist. And I mean, when I was a feminist, being radical, I remember feeling when I first of all, it was like kind of lefty, kind of all the poor people. And then it was kind of black politics. So it was all the, kind of the undertrodden, the racist approach. And then it was the racial approach from the point of view of black people, especially black Americans, was my experience. And then it was feminist. And I remember hearing the word feminist. I didn't even know, I thought the word was feminist. And then I heard about radical feminists. I thought, well, that's interesting. I'm radical. So before I know it, I'm a feminist. And then I became a radical lesbian feminist. Of course I did. I chucked out the boys. And then I became a radical lesbian separatist feminist. I think most people haven't even heard of them. So I was always on the outer edge, got as far as I could go. And that was when I wanted something spiritual again. And that's when I bumped into Lama Yeshe. So I'd been this intensive activist, and it was an enormous, I can't tell you the culture shock it was, because I'd been a hippie 10 years before that. And here are all these hippies 10 years later. I've been through this intensive political activist of 10 years, activist activity for 10 years and suddenly reverting to this 10 years ago of these bunch of hippies, and the women were called ladies, and they couldn't, and it was a very basic place. We had no running water, so the ladies couldn't carry the buckets of water because they were ladies. And it was such a shock to me, I cannot tell you. But I knew, I mean, I was really tortured because I knew this was my path. So I really had to do some processing, you know. And then of course the monks sitting in front of the nuns and all this Indian and Tibetan patriarchal kind of presentation, but I really had to look carefully and think, if there is something here, then it has to be beyond male and female. It's got to, and that's when the concept in Buddhism, I think, especially taught by the Tibetans, as we know, the nature of mind, how mind is not male or female or human for that matter. Mind is this fundamental energy that has this potential for goodness and perfection and wisdom, and that male and female and dog and human are just these temporary packages. I think that became very clear to me. And then the other thing that was really moving for me was hearing about karma. Of course, among the Tibetans, we're going to hear about karma because that's, I mean, it's a central point in the entire Buddhist view, isn't it? And that was the thing that I felt in my life I'd been missing, this concept of you come into this life yourself. As His Holiness says, karma's like self-creation, you know. That concept for me was so powerful. I mean, I'd been this Catholic, but I didn't think, I loved God, but I didn't think of God as my creator. I never had this concept of a creator. So the Buddhist idea of you bring your own self into this world, you create yourself. That for me was very powerful. This is the really one and that is the unique thing, I think. If you compare all the religious philosophical views of the universe, all of them posit a creator, posit an outside force, you know, but Buddha's the only one that doesn't, in a way. So that for me was very tasty.
Can I ask you a question about your motivation here for a minute? So if we go all the way back,
Yeah.
was your drive to fix the world or to escape from it?
Never to escape. No, I'm a complete doer. I want to run. I hear about there are two kinds of bodhisattvas, those that go behind and shepherd everybody, and then there are those that lead. And I was very relieved to hear that you could be one of them. I don't want to be a bloody shepherder. I don't want to go behind. I want to go ahead. I want to run the world, change the world, and make it what I think is best. So I absolutely do not want to escape the world. I'm happy. Escape the world in your head, yes. But you know, you can live in New York City and still be peaceful. So for me, there's never want to escape the world. That never arose in my mind. I wanted to do things. In fact, my very first introduction, I heard the Lam Rim and all these teachings, but I had no interest in meditation. I mean, the idea of sitting on my bottom with my eyes closed seemed the dumbest thing you could ever do. I had not the slightest interest. I wanted to know my mind, there's no question. But the idea of sitting there contemplating something was ridiculous. I just wanted to do things. So my very first job was working with Wisdom Publications. It was the beginnings of our publishing company, you know. I mean, all my life I've been on the propaganda side of things. Since a little girl, my father was a journalist. We had a printing company. And when I was a hippie, I was on the propaganda side, all the time, always to do with the word. So that suited my nature. So I started editing books and working with Wisdom and doing production, editing, and all of this. And I'm still doing it, you know. So I wanted to do things. I never want to escape, no question. I want to make the world a better. I wanted to change everything, make the world a better place. That was what motivated my political activity, you know. You understand? So the radical difference, of course, here is you can't leave your mind behind. You know, in the political world, there's no discussion about changing yourself. And that was what was missing, clearly, you know. So that the wish to make the world a better place for me has never changed. But I missed the first point, which is you've got to put yourself together first, the wisdom wing, you know, kind of the compassion wing without putting yourself together. So that part really is what the Dharma gives, isn't it? Turn yourself into this marvelous person, and then you can help others do the same thing.
It's such a thin line of trying to like fix the world or other people and change things versus working on yourself.
What do you mean a thin line? What do you mean by that? I don't understand. I don't say what you mean.
So, you know, because you have a lot of people, they hear like compassion and bodhicitta, and at first they're like, well, that means I have to save everybody, like fix you, show you what's wrong with you, and then I can help you. Like sort of like a parent and a child, like guide the people, but they're uncooked. You know, we have
Right,
all
and that's why you got to have the wisdom wing. And that's why I think the Lam Rim or whatever you call it in the Kargupas is the same. All our Tibetan masters are the same.
Yeah.
You've got to put yourself together first. That's why you've got to control your body and speech first, abide by the laws of karma, which is the method to turn into a happy person. Then you start looking at your mind, you see how revolting attachment and aversion are, and you want to give it all up. This is the method. It doesn't sound like it. It sounds a bit fundamentalist, but this is Buddha's method for how to become a happy, bloody person. I mean,
Mhm.
the consequence of giving up anger and harming and neuroses and abiding by the laws of karma is that you become joyful and fulfilled and content and wise. And then you open your eyes and go, oh my God, we're all in the same boat. So as His Holiness says, compassion is not enough. You've got to have wisdom. I mean, wisdom is this grand word. It just means clarity. And you only get clarity when you work on yourself and give up the rubbish, isn't it? So that's what brings you your happiness, and then you can help others do the same. So the wisdom wing is the piece that's missing, wasn't it? Do you understand? In my political activity, that was what was missing. So there's a balance. No, it's not a question of a thin line, not at all. I mean, the first stages of the practice, basically, that's the retreat mode. Best way to do it is become a monk or a nun, give up sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and mortgages and pets, and go to the mountains. And you get renunciation, you control your body and speech, you get shamatha, and you realize emptiness. Then you come down the mountain and help others. That's the ideal way to do it. 99% of us won't do that. We're going to live irregular lives, but we've got to work on ourselves. If you can't work on yourself, if you don't work on yourself, how can you help anybody? You can't even help a fly if you don't know how to help yourself. It's very obvious. Do you understand, isn't it? That's the wisdom wing. So once you do that one, then you've got some sanity and clarity and you won't lose the plot in the crazy world. But just to run away is ridiculous. It's like it's infantile.
Right, right. So when you hear though of like the Buddhist story and you focus on the empty side first, and you don't know much
So
about
what? Say it again. What?
when you hear about Buddha for the first
Yeah,
time,
yeah.
and you hear about the retreats and the emptiness,
That's right. Yeah.
that sense of why I can get out of this mess. I can just get out of samsara by kind of disappearing, by getting rid of the ego.
He's getting out of the internal samsara by giving yourself the
Right.
conditions in
Yeah,
order to do that. So then you can come out of that and then go help other people.
that's right. And so that's what I meant by the thin line. It's like
Okay.
it can easily be understood as like, oh, we can just
Yeah.
eject out of
There
this.
you go. That's exactly right. That's the commonest misinterpretation in our culture, isn't it? Because we can interpret it that way. Oh, you got to give up samsara, give up, But I know that's really such a misconception. So that's why we have to really present it in a way that's not confusing to people. And in a way, it's really sort of as obvious. If you say you want to help people uh, get more healthy, you don't just rush off and tell them to do something. You've got to first know the methods of how to get healthy, which is the wisdom wing of nutrition. Then you're qualified. If you want to help people learn music, you've got to learn music first. But we just don't realize if you want to help people be happy, you've got to learn how to be happy yourself first. Because we don't have those methods. So it's the same principles in our world. We're good at this in the world. You learn music first, then you can help others. You learn carpentry first, then you can help others. So that's the wisdom wing. But we don't get that part in our culture. We just think you rush about and help people, and then you go crazy. Wonder why we go crazy.
Right. Well, that's what was always attractive to me. So I would see like in the Catholic thing, Saint Francis, all these different kind of saints
Yeah,
who
that's it.
escape into the wilderness,
That's
and then
right.
you see the Buddha. It's like, well, that'd be nice. Like, I don't need to help anybody else. I'll just go be the yogi and just maintain that. Like, just get out of the whole thing. And then you were in like right now. There's so much craziness. There is an appeal
Yes.
to a younger mind or a kind of a juvenile mind that thinks they could escape. Because
I
anybody,
suppose, yeah, that's the one. So you've got to go frame it properly because I mean you have to escape it.
yeah.
I mean, if you want, if you want to become a musician,
Hmm.
you have to escape the rest of the world. I mean, if you want to become a musician, you do give up everything else. You sacrifice your life. You give up, boyfriends and this and that, and you sacrifice your life and you study 8, 10 hours a day. That's exactly the same. So you do give up the life because you want to become a musician, but it's not as if you're running away from it. It's just a method of practicing strongly. So then you can jump in and help others. You've got to keep remembering that's the framework for it. That's why having bodhicitta as your motivation to go to the mountains, then it makes it reasonable. But just to go to the mountains to run away is the wrong motivation, isn't it? That's what you said
Right.
before,
Yeah,
motivation.
that's right. That's right. And
Yeah, yeah,
I think in the West too, because the Dharma is so new still, they're
yeah.
misunderstanding. What am I going to, like you said, wow, why do I just want to sit around? They don't understand what's really happening.
No,
Like
that's right.
instead of being a virtuoso with an instrument, you
Yeah,
become a virtuoso with the mind. But
that's
most Westerners
exactly
are
right.
like, what's the
Exactly.
mind?
That's right, exactly. And that's the hard part, isn't it? Exactly right. And I know for me, I mean, we're all going to have different paths. One of my friends, Venerable Rene, he's a Swiss monk. And when he first met the Lama, same time as me, I think, his first wish was to go into meditation. So he's been a meditator, professional meditator for 45, 50 years. But my first wish was to do something. So we've all got different approaches. And even the concept of studying. I know when I first heard the teachings, the very first day I went to the teachings, I started already transcribing the talks. And then when I became a nun, I went to Kopan, and the first place I found my way to what they call the publishing room room, which is this little old room with a Castechna machine, you know, this old-fashioned before photocopying, and started typing all the prayers. I just loved to do that. It's my karma. I'm on the propaganda side. I always wanted to do something. I did the courses, but then I went to England, our first center there, and I remember doing doing the publishing. I became doing the publishing work. And then I heard then Lama Yeshe invited one of his Geshes from Serajay Monastery to be the resident teacher to Lama started what he called his Geshe program, which is the forerunner of this basic program and the master's program, all the study programs.
Mhm.
And it was the very first one. And I was so naive. I thought, what do you mean study? I had no concept what they meant by study.
Mhm.
So I remember the first year, I watched all these people, there's like a group of 40 people all studying Dura, all these texts, you know. I thought, what the hell are they doing? And they'd sit there at lunchtime saying all these ridiculous words. I had no concept. But the second year, I'll never forget, I heard the term, the name of the very first text they study in the Gelug monasteries, probably similar to the Kagyu, Dura, collected topics.
Mhm.
And something triggered. I thought, well, that's interesting. So I went to Geshe Tech Chok, Geshe Jumper Checker, my philosophy teacher, and they were studying 5 days a week, really intense. And I just something triggered. And I said, Geshe, I'm really busy doing wisdom publications. I was working like 60 hours a week, publishing, editing, and all that. I said, can I come to the classes? And he said, yeah, sure. I swear to you, I was 36 by this point, maybe 35. And I finally, at that first class, I had my notebook and a pencil. It was the text that they study first in the monasteries, and kind of the overview, the nuts and bolts of the Buddhist worldview, you know, phenomenon, this, that, 6 divisions of this, 5 of this, impermanent, permanent. And I heard the first teaching and I was in bliss. I cannot describe to you. It was like I finally found what my mind had wanted since I was born. It wasn't even the Lam Rim. I heard Lama Zopa's teachings. I knew it was my path. I wanted to do things, but I finally realized what I was hungry to hear. So I did 2 years, just 2 years of these, like 4 or 5 of the texts. And this was just total bliss. I remember, I'll never forget. That was when I found what I wanted to study. And that 2 years, learning Dura, Drupta, Tarig, and Lorig, these 4 main texts about logic, the mind, the nuts and bolts of how the world, and then also the Buddhist tenets, the views. I was in total heaven. And that 2 years for me, and this is 40 years ago, was the basis of anything I'm able to say since then. I couldn't say a word I say about the Dharma now without that 2 years of absolute basis, you know. So that was when I understood what it meant to study. It was blissful for me, I tell you.
So I agree. It hit me the same way. I absolutely love these topics, but
Yeah,
they're rare still. The majority of people who study these are still, I think, relatively small. And
I think it is. Yes.
could maybe you explain a little bit like what this is? Like, why would we want to study this? What is it? What
I
is it?
know. That's the thing. I think I think in our culture we have such a strong um, view, deeply ingrained. As soon as we hear spiritual,
Mhm.
we lose the plot. We think it's esoteric, mystical, can't be explained, beyond words. And then we hear the word meditation, we think it's kind of spacing out. We have these really cliched views about spiritual philosophy. So we know about philosophy in our culture, and we can go off and become philosophers and all these, you know, all the Greeks and everything. We love the Greeks, you know, and I didn't study all that stuff. I had no interest. I mean, I didn't go to university. I left school when I was 16. I had no interest in studying this boring stuff. I just decided I'd learn and find my own way in life. But I remember when you think of philosophy in our culture, and I was very shocked by this. I heard these Greeks, what do they call it? What's this? Who's that Greek fellow? Yes,
Socrates.
another one, Sophocles. There's Socrates. Yeah, I've heard about the Socratic approach, and I might be naive here. Was that philosophy, by necessarily, is a bunch of ideas about how the world is, but you would never practice one. That would be inferior, and that for me was almost like mind-boggling. You'd think you'd actually learn about a view of the world, but you must stay objective. You would never become subjective. We look down upon that in our culture. So I remember Professor Jeffrey Hopkins, who passed away recently. You know, yeah. Well, we started Wisdom. Well, first it started in Kathmandu with Nick Rinpoche, who does Lama Yeshe Wisdom Archive. That was in the early 70s, and I came along, and then I worked with Nick at the beginnings of wisdom at Kopan, and then Lama Yeshe moved us to England and we started there. And I remember in 82 or 81 or something, when I was working there, I heard about Jeffrey Hopkins's amazing thesis called Meditation on Emptiness, which at the time was only available as what they call it, a microfiche thing for scholars. And I remember he'd had some books published in England. This is after I'd started the Geshe program. Must have been later than 81, 82, maybe 83. No, 82, 81 when I started, 80 or something. Doesn't matter. Sorry, raving on. So I remember contacting him, and then we said, can we publish it? So we published this amazing 1,200-page book, Meditation on Emptiness, this incredible tome, you know. And I remember he told me he was the one who began the the Asian Philosophical Studies program in University of Virginia, I think it's called, in wherever, Charlottesville or somewhere. No, is it Charlottesville? Somewhere in West Virginia, I forget now, but University of Virginia it's called. And he said at that time, in 1976, when he got that job, it was the first time, I think, in the American university system where a person who was was the head of one of these types of programs, it was the first time that a practitioner was appointed. And he said he was looked down upon because he was a practitioner, and that's seen as very kind of not very authentic. You've got to be objective. So what I'm getting at is our view of philosophy in the West is you've got to be objective. The idea of practicing a philosophy, that sounds like religion. And then when we think of religion, we think of it as a dogma. We think of it as coming from a creator. We think of it as believing, and you become a fanatic. So this is where this view of the Socratic approach of being very objective. So here we are, the Tibetan Buddhist approach, or the Buddhist approach. Of course you must practice it. What the hell else? What's the point of having a head full of ideas? It's schizophrenic. It's like having a bunch of theories in your head about cooking, but how dare you make a cake? Oh, that's too personal. I mean, this is how mad we are in our culture, I think. So I think we think of religious philosophy as a belief system, and we don't want that. So then we think of philosophy as something you wouldn't practice. So, but here, the Buddhist approach is, of course, you would practice it. You do not believe a single word of it. You take it as your hypothesis, just like you would with science, and then you prove it or you disprove it. That, for me, is very, very powerful. And that really fell into place when I started to study. So when we can understand that, we would be joyful to study the Buddha's views, because basically, Buddha's telling us that, you know, this all the marvelous world, the world view of Buddha coming from these Hindus, has been all presented in this literature over these centuries, you know, and there it is. It's like the nuts and bolts of how the world exists that you then have to realize in experience through meditation. So, I mean, yeah, so I'm chatting away here. What do you think?
No. This is something I think about a lot recently.
Yes.
I was because we're always dealing with ideas and concepts from different cultures that we don't have in ours. And
Yes.
instead of holding a place of not knowing and being okay with not knowing and then slowly learning, we put it into a box we already have. Well, it must be a religion, or it must be a philosophy.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. That's
It's
right.
really neither.
No.
It's kind of in both, but it's not either. It's something different as well. And if you just hold
simply,
on.
no, it's I think the approach, you see, we understand the scientific approach perfectly. I remember one time it was in New Zealand. It happened to be in New Zealand. And this is interesting. It was a town called Nelson, and then we have a center there. Lama Zopa has a center, and it's out of interest. One of our amazing yogi lamas, one of Lama Zopa's lamas, one of mine, Kirti Center Rinpoche, he passed away. He was asked at some point, "Where's the best place on the planet to meditate?" And he said, "Nelson, New Zealand." Big surprise, you know. Anyway, it happened to be I was giving a talk at this town for our center there. And it was that this fellow asked this question, and he happened to be a scientist. And it was the only time I've ever been asked this question, and it was a marvelous question. He said, "Who revealed the teachings to the Buddha?" And so what that implies is it's religion, therefore it's revelation because it comes from on high, therefore you can't prove it, therefore you can't prove it to be true, because if you can prove Christianity to be true, it means you become God, and you cannot say that. So that's the view we have of religion. It's beyond words, it's mystical, and it can't be proved, and that's deep in our bones. So here's this fellow, this brilliant question, and I said to him, "Well, would you ask Einstein who revealed the teachings about relativity to him?" And of course he laughed, we all laughed, and of course we wouldn't. But this is the point I try to make, that Buddha is closer to Einstein than he is to Jesus. There's no question, because Buddha, like Einstein, has used his intelligence, has observed the universe, and of course we have to posit here the possibility that this extraordinary view of the mind that these Hindus came up with well before the Buddha, that by developing this brilliant technique called samadhi, single point of concentration, you can access these subtler levels of mind. They discovered these subtler levels of mind. And that's what we have to take as a view in Buddhism, that you've got these subtle levels of cognition. And then when you've got that subtle level, you use this mind to observe the universe. And then you come up with your findings, exactly like Einstein. And as His Holiness says to us Westerners, if you can prove from your own experience that Buddha is wrong, of course you must reject him. That's the scientific approach. So that for me is always the approach to take. It's not a question of a bunch of ideas you believe in or you be objective about and think how interesting. It's either true or it's not, So the scientific approach is actually the approach that Buddha takes. But everybody says, oh, you can't prove this, you can't prove that, or it hasn't been proven. Well, excuse me, there it all is, the literature. Take it and study it and make it your own experience, or prove it to be right or wrong. It's exactly the same approach, but we don't hear it this way. So for me, that's why I always say we must take it as our working hypothesis. It's Buddha's proof. It's Buddha's truth. He's found it to be true. He didn't make it up. He didn't have a vision. It didn't come as a revelation. He's not speculating. It's his own direct experiential findings. And that's exactly what we mean by science. So I constantly make this point because it's a surprise to us to think this. We never think this way.
So this brings us to a question or a topic of embodiment. So this first person perspective. So while he's doing scientific method, but it's also through himself, through direct experience.
That's what I'm saying. So what we think of as scientific is using your brain or using a microscope, but it's using the microscope of your own mind.
Yes. But I think this is the big doorway. It's like, this is something that really doesn't really exist in the West. So I think people put on religion because we're completely unfamiliar with these samadhis, essentially this level in first person experience of these different layers and depths of the own consciousness. It hasn't really been.
Don't even call it unconscious. It makes it too mystical.
No, consciousness. I said consciousness.
Yes, in other words, the Buddha's view of the mind. This is why we've got to start with that. It's so radically different from the material views of the mind. So this is why when we study the mind, we study those texts and we learn you've got mental consciousness and we have sensory. And then within the mental consciousness we've got the grosser level, which is conceptuality. And that's the level we exist at, which is the tip of the iceberg. But these genius Indians, well before the Buddha, I always quote, was His Holiness who says these amazing Indians more than 3,000 years ago, they were the ones who began the investigation to the nature of self. They're the ones that developed this incredibly sophisticated psychological skill called single-pointed concentration, with which they then delved into the depth of the mind and discovered these subtle levels of cognition. And that's why Lama Yeshe was amazing always from the beginning, trying to get us to understand the phenomenal potential of our mind. Forget emptiness, forget nirvana, forget bodhicitta, just the capacity of our mind to have bliss and clarity. This is unknown in neuroscientists' views. You go to a neuroscientist and give me methods to get bliss, they'll laugh at you, So this is why they first have to understand the Buddha's view of what the mind is. Much more utterly so outrageously different. It's like a joke, I mean, we live at the conceptual level and the sensory, and that's all we posit as existing in the West,
Yeah. So I think then when Einstein's having these breakthroughs, because you hear these scientists talk and they take it to this place of beauty, the good ones, like the top of the top. They take it like to this place of beauty and math and art and poetry, where it suggests they are having experiences. It's not.
I don't know what you mean by all that stuff. I don't know. That sounds a bit mystical to me. What do you mean?
Oh, no. What I mean is
hard, cold facts. 1 + 1 is 2 is a fact.
Yes.
Mind is not physical. It's said to be a fact. Karma, this one, that one, the terminology, the definitions are precision and clarity. So don't get too mystical on me. What are you saying?
No, I don't mean mystical. I mean, like, because of the time they've put in with their mathematics, it becomes an art for them. They're able to work on these things in an experiential level. It's not any longer just like writing on the paper. Like, they have experiences, like time spent, like their meditations essentially on their topics.
I don't know about all that. I have no idea. Maybe that's true. I don't know.
Oh, okay.
And I mean, I've never thought of it like that.
I think when Einstein came with relativity, he was watching a train. He was at a train station. And so it's the culmination of all of his study and contemplation with the numbers, and he had sort of hit a wall, and then he's out. It's like a shower experience. You're in the shower and then all of a sudden you get an aha moment.
Well, it sounds like he's doing Mahamudra. I mean, that's really what Mahamudra is.
That's what I'm saying.
One approach is you study, Lama Yeshe talks about this in his book. The first approach of learning something, which we are good at in the West, is you learn the theory first, cooking or music, and then you gradually practice it, and then the aha moments come. But the Mahamudra one is you go straight to the cooking and you intuit the recipe, and then you can explain it later. So you're talking more about some Mahamudra experience after all the training, though. So then
Yeah.
still, what's this? What are you making? What's the point you're making?
Well,
What's the point, though?
I'm making that a lot of times Westerners, we're stuck on a cognitive conceptual level with study. We think nobody wants to study Dharma because they say, oh, that's more intellectualism. I'm just going to sit and meditate.
Sure.
And I'm saying when you take the time to study nature of mind,
Yes.
it integrates into your experience. And I'm saying
And
somebody,
when it becomes experiential.
it
That's right.
becomes experiential.
It leads to, okay, that's when I studied with Geshe Tekchok. He said, don't discount the intellectual. We live at the level of intellectuality, of conceptuality. So you use that, and it's literally the stepping stone. So if I'm studying music, I squeeze my brain learning all the theories, which is intellectual, but then I put my hands on the piano and it filters down and becomes experience. And that's not just mystical, that's logical. That's how we learn everything. And that's his approach. Of course it is. That's the point. But we don't see that. You're absolutely right. We sit there and squeeze our brains. I remember one time at Copan, actually, one of the students, she said, well, I'm not intellectual. I don't want philosophy. And I said, tell me what you do with your life. She said, oh, I'm an artist. I said, oh, really? What kind of artist? Well, I'm a graphic designer. I said, oh, that's interesting. So you have a computer. So you have to learn how to use a computer. And if you're a graphic designer, you have to learn shape and color and measurements and millimeters and inches and so in the end, I said, you're squeezing your brain. You're the most sophisticated thinker in the world. So don't tell me you don't like philosophy. It's rubbish, True. Everything. I mean, music is a result of squeezing your brain with the theories. The best cake in the world is a result of squeezing your brain with recipes. Well, experience of emptiness is the result of squeezing your brain with dependent arising and all the other stuff. So you can't. It's true. We've got to see the intellectual is the first step, and that leads to the experience.
Yeah. And I think this again comes to this unique place where Dharma sits, where it's like, if it's just intellectual, like a lot of Western
That's right.
academia,
Exactly.
nobody wants to do that. And I get that.
Yeah.
But then it's also not just experiential, where it's like you don't know in the world you're doing and you're just having some mystical
That's
woo-hoo
right.
thing.
That's
It's just like, it's common sense. It's just like playing a piano or something.
right. Exactly.
There's no difference here, but they miss that other bit. They don't want to do the study bit.
Well, in the West, because we think, because I think our trouble is, it's true, because I think that's our Western view, that by definition, that's what I meant before, being a philosopher, it's not experience. It's got to be intellectual and objective and open-minded. But the thought that you'd use that to come to a conclusion from experience is almost is for the Western view, I think, is seen as contradictory, is bizarre, So I think we divide off the intellectual and the experiential completely, although in reality we don't. If you're a musician, you've got to start with theory. But imagining like never playing the piano, but saying you're a good musician because you know all the theories, or imagine you're a good cook, but you never make a cake. We know there's no contradiction, but when it comes to philosophical views, we think there's a contradiction. And that's just because we have these misconceptions about spiritual philosophy being belief, It's so true. And that's why Lama Yeshe never, from the very beginning, he never encouraged his students to study or to learn Tibetan. He said, because I'm shocked. He said, when my students start learning Tibetan, they become intellectual and become arrogant. So he never encouraged. Of course, he did encourage, but he'd always directly, all the time, pointing to experience, trying to get us. He taught Mahamudra from the very beginning. He taught highest yoga tantra from the very beginning, the simple concepts of it. He taught inner fire from the very beginning. But he tried to get us to have experience. Then he of course he started his Geshe program, but he wanted us to get beyond the intellect. Because we're so stuck in our heads, Western people. So true.
So that is interesting, because we're a different culture, and how it's presented in the West has to be, you don't want to turn people off or they'll miss it. So that's very skillful, of course.
Yeah, exactly. That's right. And try to get us to see we've got this potential. I mean, Lama Yeshe used to call ego the self-pity me, which sounds so cruel, but it's so true. This self-pity me, it's not my fault. I didn't ask to get born. It's always someone else's fault. God's fault, mummy's fault, daddy's fault, the world's fault. I'm this poor innocent victim who got plonked on this planet. I mean, this is how we believe, it's what we think, It's terrible. It's like a conspiracy theory. Whereas Buddha says you make yourself. I think that's the best thing I've ever heard in my life. I love it.
Yeah.
Then you take responsibility.
Well, that's the key. Nobody wants to take self-responsibility.
No, we do not. We do not. We want to blame. We're like babies. It's so true. That's our suffering, isn't it?
It is our suffering. And I think you're very famous for this, at least in my circles.
What's
Uh,
that?
the self-responsibility
Oh,
and
I see. Okay.
no nonsense, which I think is really needed.
It's,
So,
I know.
I have a few questions, I have a few thoughts when I knew I was going to be
Okay,
speaking.
go
I have to ask Ravina this. So when so if we're suffering, so we all there's the minutia of daily life. You live in New York, and it seems to not be impermanent sometimes because they keep happening. It seems like the same thing is happening day in day out, and they triggers is the word now people use. We're being triggered by this, triggered
on.
by
Right,
that.
exactly.
Um, so sometimes you can have something happen, and then you walk away, you reflect, and you can let it go. Um, what do you do when the thing continues? It's waiting for you, and then it lingers on. How do you handle these kind of
Okay.
sufferings in the
Why don't you
moment?
give me an example? Make it very down to earth.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So where you're in the city, but out here in this where I am, I'm in kind of a village kind of situation. So there's a lot of like, lawnmowers and people spraying chemicals on their lawns all the time, killing all sentient beings. It's very loud. So like this. So you know that this is going to happen. These chemicals cause cancers and different things like this. So it's like, but you can't stop your neighbors. You live by neighbors.
Okay, no, I understand. I understand exactly your point. Okay, I understand exactly. I understand. So this seems to me, this is why having an understanding of the presentation of the stages of the path is absolutely fundamentally necessary to live our lives. So in other words, what you're talking about is you see suffering and we see suffering and we have a panic attack because we have compassion. There's no question. Oh my God, look at the suffering. Look at the world. Look at this all making the world a mess. So we have compassion. We reach out. So then compassion, though, this is the point in the Buddhist view, and this is not how we tend to think, I think. As His Holiness says, compassion isn't enough. So what that means is this: we have to have the wisdom wing. So what is that? That means whenever we see something out there, we have to have a way of interpreting what it is and where's it coming from and why is it happening. And that's the view of karma. And if we don't study Lord Buddha's view of the karma, which coming well before him, that was observed already by these genius Indians, that there's this natural law that runs the universe, which is the law within which our minds run, or is the law that runs our minds, and which means that every single thing we think and do and say is the process that produces us. And so then karma, everything we think and do and say ripens in four ways. One, a type of rebirth. Two, tendencies in the mind. Three, and this is the question, the point now, the experiences we have that we see in front of us. And four, the environment. So the way the environment impacts upon us, how we're seen and treated by others, these are called experiences similar to the cause, and these are called environmental karma. So when we understand that what's going on outside the world. Now, if you look outside the world and you see a beautiful garden full of veggies and there are rainbows and flowers, you're going to be very happy. And we never ask the question, oh my God, why is this happening? We just greedily grasp at it and assume it's our human right, because that's attachment, wanting only lovely things. But the millisecond, and this we don't get what attachment wants. We have a panic attack. Oh my God, look at the world. It's causing all this suffering, blah, blah, blah. We have to have an interpretation of why it is happening. If you and I go to this, like I always think of you and I, let's say we go decide we want to go off and volunteer for those Doctors Without Frontiers, and we go to the war zone and we walk into the tent where the surgeons are, and you've got some wisdom about medicine and healing and surgery, but I maybe know how to put a band-aid on, meaning I don't have an interpretation of why all this suffering and how to interpret the suffering. Then I will have a panic attack and freak out, but you will not have a panic attack because you have wisdom that can interpret this suffering, interpret where the blood is coming from, and then you know how to help. So that's where wisdom informs compassion. So what I'm getting at is there are causes for everything we see. So if we have the view of karma, I'll look at the world and I'll go, oh my God, look at that, people harming the environment. So then I'll think, well, that's due to past actions. First of all, my own self, I will see, I'm now seeing right in front of me the environment being harmed. That's a very painful thing. The cause of that is something in my own mind that I've created in the past. It's causing me to have this karmic appearance of suffering. If I see the rainbows and the flowers, I will see exactly the same. Wow, this is my karmic appearance of past virtue. The other one is my karmic appearance of past suffering. So if we have that view for a start, and it's huge, this is like practically realizing emptiness, having an understanding of karma, which is the way to describe why things are happening. Or if I see people harming each other, or I see Mr. Trump, some crazy politician, let's say, So instead of having a panic attack, oh my God, Mr. Trump, he's evil, he's this, he lies, he steals, he's going to harm everybody. Oh my God, why is all this happening? I'll listen to Mr. Trump and I will go, well, there's lying, there's stealing, there's hubris, there's arrogance. And then I'll go, well, this is another approach. I'll recognize that. I have those thoughts as well. I have those tendencies as well. So then I'll learn from it. Or if I see suffering out there, the war zone, or what you just said, I'll go, that's the fruit of negative karma of all these people. And I'll have compassion. So we've got to have karma. Without karma, we can't explain why it's happening. And without explaining why something's happening, you can't have compassion and you can't help. So you've got to have the first stages of practice, karma and the mind. That's what we learn in the wisdom mode. You learn karma, the laws of karma, which is Buddha's amazing, sophisticated view of an explanation of the universe and why things happen. You have that, it becomes the basis of how you interpret the world, and then you understand the mind, you understand there are delusions and attachment and this and that, and these are the basis for interpreting the world. And this is the basis of the wisdom wing, and working on that gives me clarity and sanity, and then I can practice compassion and will never lose the plot.
Mhm. And it's not, that's one, thank you so much. That's beautiful. And so it's not just compassion, these sentient
Compassion
beings
is
are
not
being,
enough. It's just all the compassion we have now is sentimental compassion, Bryson. Oh, these poor people being harmed. Look at this poor universe being suffering. Look at all these poor people suffering. It's sentimental compassion because we don't know why it's happening. Like me walking into that tent, all I can do is put a band-aid on. I don't know how to interpret. I'm feeling hopeless. I don't know why. What's the cause of this broken leg? How do you fix it? I don't know. But wisdom gives you the method, and then you can practice compassion based on your wisdom, because now you can do something to help because you understand the causes of the suffering. Karma is the cause. They say the bodhisattvas have the greatest compassion for us, because forget about not realizing emptiness, because we don't realize cause and effect, that we are the creators of our own universe, which of course is a cosmic concept. We never have a view like that. But that's what karma tells us. We're not made by some bloody creator. That's a conspiracy theory. When it doesn't come from its own side, it doesn't come from nowhere. It's not good luck and bad luck. Karma is a natural law that runs the universe. It's coherent and consistent and logical. This is a shock to us because we don't accept this. This is what Buddha has found. It's what he's telling us. This is the very first step. And this is the basis of all practice. We don't like it in the West. We just think of it as another version of punishment and reward. But in Buddhism, there's no such thing as a creator. Therefore, there's no punishment and there's no reward, because there's no punisher and there's no rewarder. It's like childish. Karma is a pretty intense view.
well, that's where the mind immediately goes. Like, what did I do? Why did I cause this?
Well, yes, you did. But you also cause the good. We won't be so childish. If you just eat the sugar when you know you've got a tendency to get diabetes, you don't just burst into tears and become like a victim. Oh, I'm a naughty girl, I ate sugar. You bloody do something about it and stop it. You take responsibility. And that's what regret is in the purification practice. I did eat sugar. Look, it's going to cause me suffering. I must change. So you grow up and you take responsibility. But we're so addicted to guilt and shame and blaming. We're just like infants. But karma is taking responsibility, not guilt. Guilt is not taking responsibility. It's like a baby. It's intense, but it causes us to grow up.
Yeah, that's right. So, okay, so now we see the environmental destruction and we recognize, well, this is happening, this is karma. So now what's the next step? How do I mature it so it resolves?
The very first step is when you know the long-term cause of the lousy environment. Okay, is the fruit of past killing. Okay, one way the karma ripens is a type of rebirth. So we've got a rebirth called a human rebirth, which is like a miracle because it's the fruit of non-killing. Then second, we've got a mind in this human body, and look at us, all our tendencies, the tendency to love and tendency to be kind, tendency to kill, whatever. So the fruit of killing, killing brings 4 results. Example from the past. One is a type of rebirth that isn't a human. So we've got the fruit of non-killing, which is amazing. But second, look in the world, most humans have a tendency to kill, which is so tragic. The third way killing ripens is an experience of being killed or dying young. Look at the world. Most people get sick. No, sorry, not sickness yet, but die young, get killed. Look at the suffering. And the fourth result of killing is the environmental result, which is the physical world itself is polluted, it harms you. So this is the one that takes the longest. I've got countless thousands of lifetimes. The collective karma of look at COVID. The collective karma of us, millions of humans, billions of humans, the collective karma from probably 10,000 lifetimes ago that is now manifesting as a polluted environment, where the physical world itself, like your grandma, you kiss your grandma and you die. You know, that's environmental karma. So when you know the cause, it's not just putting your plastic in the wrong bloody place and doing too much CO2. That's a short-term cause. The long-term cause is past killing from 10,000 lifetimes ago that bring gradually the result of a polluted environment. So the first result is, the first cause, when I see Mr. Trump or I see the lousy environment, I'll go, thank you. That's the fruit of killing. That's the fruit of lying. That's the fruit of stealing. And then the next step is, I must stop it now.
Mm-hmm.
That's the first one, yourself. Then the compassion wing, what can I do to help others?
Mm-hmm. Wonderful.
Do you understand?
Yeah.
And we'll never lose the plot. That's what bodhisattvas, they've got these outrageous, courageous beings who understand karma, who take total responsibility and have incredible compassion. And the suffering of the world is grist for them, mill. It just makes us mentally break down. You know, we can't handle it because we don't understand, we haven't got enough wisdom yet coming from karma and the mind. We haven't done enough work. So the world overwhelms us because we don't know why it's happening. And that's the problem with the Western philosophical views, the scientific views with respect to us. At least if you're a Christian or a Muslim, at least someone's got a plan. It's called God. I mean, that's fine. You know, someone's got a plan. They can keep it in their pocket if they like. They don't have to tell me because I have faith in them. That's a pretty good way to live your life, I'd suggest. But the materialist view, with respect to us, there's no answer to why there is suffering in the world. There's no answer to why there is war. We say, oh, we haven't found the reasons yet. So no, and then we think we didn't ask to get born. And then we think we started in our mother's womb. And then we think we're only the brain. And then we think it's mother's fault, daddy's fault, God's fault. I mean, no wonder we're all crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So the Buddha's view is, no, honey child, your mind is beginningless. It's not physical. You came into this world programmed with your own stuff, all the good and all the bad, and you can change and you can help others. So take hold of that. Wow, you know,
Mm-hmm.
that's how I think about it.
So yeah, wonderful. So now when we see the suffering, it's a cause for motivation. So we can work on ourselves. We have to double down.
You've got to work on yourself first. Do the work yourself. Do the work. Understand karma. Apply karma. Become a grown-up person. Take responsibility. Know you can change your mind. We're not set in stone. Or as Lama Zopa says, we can mold our mind into any shape we like. We can create virtuous karma, become a marvelous human being full of confidence and self-contentment, which is what the wisdom wing is. And then on the basis of this, you see, oh my God, we're all in the same boat, and you have some courage to help others.
Mm-hmm. The
And you
interconnectedness.
like the bodhisattva, you never give up doing what you can. One step I can't go to Ukraine and stop the war, but I can help the mouse not get suffering. I can't do much. I can put a band-aid on. Better than nothing. Do something and grow your wisdom. That's what bodhisattvas do on the 6 perfections, going from life to life, learning how to help others and learning their wisdom. You know, that's what we're trying to do with enthusiasm. They say enthusiasm is the main quality.
Yeah, the enthusiasm. I've been thinking about this a lot lately. The joyful effort, the diligence, the discipline. To have discipline without the enthusiasm is
that's right.
Short term.
And we've got a long time, and when we understand, I mean, when we say joyful, that's 4th of the 6 perfections, isn't it? And we say joyful effort, enthusiastic person. It sounds like ridiculous. What do you mean? How do you get that? Well, the only way to get that is to see it in the framework of the opposite, which of course laziness. And it's very shocking. But when we understand laziness, let's just look at it. This is why we don't have enthusiasm. So think about it. There's different kinds of laziness. The first level is can't be bothered. So analyze what it is I can't be bothered doing is a thing that attachment doesn't want, because attachment's the drive. Attachment is a junkie that only wants nice feelings. Attachment only wants our comfort zone. Attachment is this primordial inertia, the very basic level of attachment, to be comfortable. So by definition, to make effort, you have to make effort to do something that you haven't done before. That's why it needs effort. And the thing that you need to make effort in is the thing that attachment doesn't want. So the very first level, and that's what the Lamas say, you've got to know the benefits of something. If you know the benefits, then you'll make effort. And so that means so the most powerful antidote is to give the most powerful cause of why we can't make effort is attachment to our comfort zone. The second kind of attachment, the second kind of laziness is even worse. It's wicked. It's, oh, I'm too busy. I'll do it later. This is our worst crime against ourselves. So what's the thing you put off doing? The thing that you can't be bothered doing. What's the thing you can't be bothered doing? The thing that attachment doesn't want. So attachment's the main cause of the problem. This inertia of being in our comfort zone. We don't want to stretch ourselves. It's too much effort. It's painful. It's scary. And the third one, the worst laziness is, oh, I'm not capable. I can't do that. And we have that in bucket loads in our culture. So attachment's the cause. Attachment's this primordial junkie that wants to be comfortable, you know. Do you understand? And then when you counteract that, enthusiasm is the result. And we love enthusiastic people. They give us courage, you know. And we won't succeed if we don't have enthusiasm. We have to create it. You understand? We have to get it. And it's hard giving up attachment.
Yeah. I love how you just said that's a junkie. That's the framework here is so important when people can frame it and see like, oh, I'm acting like an attached junkie. I don't want to do that.
That's right. Well, attachment is the main. I mean, attachment. The Four Noble Truths even says that attachment is effectively the main cause of suffering. I mean, we all know that ignorance, marimpa, is the main cause, but that's too subtle. Effectively, this realm we live in, this human planet, it's a realm of attachment created by attachment. We live in this object. We live in this body of the five senses. We live in the world of the objects of the five senses. So attachment runs the show. And if we don't understand attachment, and we don't in our culture, this is tremendously powerful when we understand attachment. It's this multifaceted. The primordial energy of attachment is dissatisfaction, and then it gives rise to emotional hunger, which then gives rise to kind of manipulating and controlling, and then gives rise to exaggerating the deliciousness of the object, and then it gives rise to grasping at it, getting it, and then possessing it as mine. And then the crucial job of attachment is overestimating, exaggerating the deliciousness. So we live our lives driven by the craving, the emotional hunger to get the nice things. And then what anger is, aversion, is the panic attack when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So we go between these two 1,000 times a day, and this is basically suffering. This is the world of suffering. This is the suffering, you know. So these two, we sound so simple, attachment. We don't even get it in the West, though. And Lama Yeshe said, I can tell you about attachment for one whole year. You'll never begin to understand it until you start deeply going inside. And this is the truth. It sounds so simple initially, but it's massive. It's a massive attachment, you know. And it's intimate relationship with anger. When I heard Lama Zopa say it was like it blew my mind. I just heard it and it helped me put it together. Anger is a response when attachment doesn't get what it wants. So the default is attachment, this emotional hunger to only get the nice things, which means to only get what I want, which means to only have lovely things, nice sound, nice smell, nice taste. And then the panic attack of aversion is when it doesn't get it. And this is how we live our lives, going between these two like drunken sailors, you know.
No, I love that because in our culture, so many people think anger is like that's a strong emotion, a leader, an angry person, and we want to. It's like a daddy figure almost, where it's like it's really childish. If you're still an adult getting angry, it's like you should have some shame about that. That's ridiculous that you haven't figured.
No, because it's a panic. Basically, it's a panic attack.
Yeah.
Because we talk about anxiety and panic. That's the response when attachment isn't getting what it wants. So of course we feel sorry for people who have panic attacks, but anger is a panic attack, except that you harm others as well. I understand anger really well. It's a panic attack. You can't cope with not getting what you want. So it's a totally infantile view. Of course, we see it and it's tremendous and it destroys the world. But to understand attachment and aversion and the intimate relationship between them is something we do not think of in our culture. But this is the Buddha's view of the three poisons. The root one, of course, is ego grasping, the assumption of an I in the first place, which then attachment is the main voice to get what that fantasy I wants. And then aversion is the panic attack of when it doesn't get what it wants. That's the three poisons, and that's the suffering of the world, you know?
Yeah. No, we glorify it. We glorify the strong ego, the anger, the tough, guns and all the violence. It's a glorified thing instead of seeing like that's childish and that's like an 8th grader on the playground getting upset. Just like
But the trouble is, again, this is where I think we can't distinguish. We have to learn to distinguish between attachment to something and liking something, just in a reasonable way, and then anger about something and being critical. And they're completely different. So my way to put it is like this. You see war in Ukraine. It's a fact. This is not anger. It's a fact. To say these people are killing each other is not anger. That's a fact. But we immediately put anger onto it and we assume it's the same thing. But they're two separate things. One is a fact. There is a war and he murdered him. The other is how dare that happen and then a panic attack. That's separate. Even if you just stub your toe, one event is simply pain in your toe, but then we immediately, because attachment is not getting what it wants, we then add anger on top and assume that the anger is the experience. So then we think if you've got to give up anger, you've got to throw the baby out for the bathwater and say, oh, well, there's no war. If you give up attachment, I mean, Lama Zopa said, when we hear the Buddha says we've got to give up attachment to be happy, because we conflate happiness with attachment, we conflate liking a chocolate cake with attachment to chocolate cake. So then when you hear you've got to give attachment, we throw the baby out the bathwater and think I've got to throw out the cake and even liking it. But that's nihilistic. So there's a distinction between anger and criticism. I remember Martin Luther King said, he said, it's good to find fault. There is racism, there is injustice, but then you say, what can I do to help? So it's finding fault is one thing, but being angry about it is completely separate. But we think they're the same. That's the big mistake. So when you give up anger, you don't become a weak, pathetic person. When you know, I can see that myself in my I've got a strong tendency to be critical and to be angry since I'm born. So I've learned to give up anger, but I haven't learned to give up criticism. I haven't learned up being a loud, speedy person either. You don't become this wimp when you give up anger, you know? Do you understand?
Yeah. And it's so skillful too. I think a lot of people miss this. Like, that really takes a fine mind to be able to observe that, because it happens so fast.
Right.
Stub the toe anger.
Yeah, that's right. And this is why I find when I first learned low rig, you know, the text about the mind, it's like a revelation. You learn the Buddhist model of the mind, which is so distinct. There are 3 categories of states of mind. There's no fourth. There are those that are neurotic, delusional, misconceptions, the source of pain, the afflictions, the voices of ego, attachment, anger, jealousy, and the rest. Then there are those that are virtuous, love, compassion, kindness. And they're like utterly different states of mind, but we don't make a distinction. We give them equal status in our modern psychology. We think a normal person has a bit of attachment, a bit of anger, a bit of love, a bit of jealousy. But the Buddha's view is so radical. He says the word Buddha, to me, blows my mind. The etymology of the word Buddha is so delicious. Buddha implies the utter eradication from your mind of all neuroses or delusions. And Da implies the development to perfection of wisdom and goodness. We do not have a view like that in our culture. Once we understand that, that tells us the methodology. I've got to distinguish between the delusions and the virtues. That's the job of being a Buddhist. So that means I've got to distinguish between a valid concept, there is a war in Ukraine, a valid concept, I stubbed my toe, there is pain. That's a valid concept. But how dare it happen to me? Who do those people think they are? That's anger, and that's not valid. So we have to see the difference. It's huge. And we don't understand this at the level of Buddhist psychological model. There are delusions, there are virtues, and they're radically, completely different. We can never see the difference between anger and facts, you know. Do you understand? Or delicious cake. That cake can be a delicious cake. Attachment doesn't mean it's not giving up attachment doesn't mean you give up seeing it's a delicious cake. It could be a really well-made cake, delicious, beautifully made, but attachment is a decoration. As Lama Zopa says, delusions, the afflictions, decorate on top of what is there, layers upon layers of characteristics that aren't there. That's what they talk about emptiness. They decorate, delusions decorate, embellish, you know, exaggerate, distort. There's such a unique view. And this is the Buddhist one. We get this, Buddhism makes sense to us. You know, we can see the job to be done mentally, you know. You understand?
And these are so important too, because, you know, I started meditation without the study. So I was in martial arts and Zen Buddhism.
Yep, that's right.
When I finally came to collected topics, and I was like, the meditation became so much more rich.
That's exactly right. That's the point, I tell you. And that's for me, I feel, I did those 2 years way back then. And then a couple of years later, Lama Zopa said, I've been doing wisdom for 10 years, editing, and then I had lost that job. And then I didn't know what to do. And Lama Zopa said, I should go and teach. I always remember it because I had a meeting with him. I always remember this when he said, go and do, it was like 10 years I've been doing this work, and Lama Yeshe had been my main teacher. And I never know Lama Zopa was my main teacher too. It took me 10 years for the penny to drop. And the penny dropped at this particular meeting after a retreat. He called me up and he said, and I think it was like Michelangelo, that big picture, that big painting of God pointing his finger. I always have that vision of it. He said, go to Sydney and teach. I got a shock. So I mean, I'd done 10 years of editing and then the study and stuff. And I never thought of teaching. And he said, go to Sydney and teach, like God, you know. So I went to start to teach. And I thought, what am I going to teach? I thought, what if I run out of words? And I thought, because I'd done these study, you know, these intensive study. And then I started to be able to put it into practice. Because I mean, and anything I've ever said in all these years since then, that's 1987, all the so-called teachings I give, any thinking I've done is all on the basis of those 2 years. I swear to you, Bryson. You know, those 2 years of the nuts and bolts of the mind, of logic, and of collected topics, and those other ones. I wish I mean, my biggest regret in this life is not enough study, you know. But all I've been doing in these last 40 years is putting meat on those bones. And without those bones, I wouldn't know where to put the meat. I wouldn't know what to say. I just rab it on, you know. So anything I say is based on those 2 years of study. That's a fact. Do you understand?
Yeah, and I'm really happy you shared that. I think that's really important. I hope people hear this. And
I know when I first did study, I know some of my friends, we were about 40 of us in the year. It was so intense. It was amazing. We studied 5 days a week. We did discussion and debate afterwards. We had exams. I'd never passed an exam in my life. I'd never studied at school. It was the first time I studied. I remember in Tarig, Lorig, the Tarig, the logic one, I got top marks, even over the best monks. I remember getting the top mark. I was so proud of myself, you know. I can't believe it. It was bliss for me. Those 2 years were like bliss because I realized that what we're trying to do is conquer delusions, conquer afflictions, and they are liars and misconceptions and neurotic things that run our lives. And they're fucking liars and need to be argued with. So for me, the study of logic was so powerful because delusions are illogical and irrational and emotional and neurotic, and they cause my pain. So you've got to argue using logic and analysis, argue with them, to show my own mind how they are foolish. This is how you get rid of delusions, not just wishing it away.
And Shantideva says the same thing. These are like horrific enemies that we have to put to rest. We have
That's
to.
right, exactly.
He doesn't play around there and just
There you go.
they're not there and have no mind. He's like, you got to go to war.
No, totally that. And that means you've got to have courage because we don't like to hear. They've got these parts of our mind that are horrible. We think, oh, that's criticizing me, you know? No, it's seeing why I'm suffering. When we can own why we're suffering, which is our own mind, then we can hold it and take responsibility and do it with kindness to ourselves by nourishing our good part, you know, because we are the recipient of all this work. It's not putting ourselves down, but we hear it. I think this is part of the problem. I often joke and say Tibetans are a bit fundamentalist how they talk, because I mean they talk like 10th century. And I hear Lama, so that's why Lama Yeshe was so amazing. He talked like a modern hippie, you know, like very soft and sweet in the way he said things. But these Tibetans are it's a very fundamental way of putting it. So we've got to find a way to say these words in this way out of self-respect and self-confidence. When you have you have self-confidence, you're happy to find the faults in you because you know you want to get better. Instead of we have mental breakdown, I'm so guilty, I'm so bad, you know. Not like that at all. It's coming from courage and self-confidence and the wish to become a more happy person.
Yeah. It's a rich inner world. It's a whole
That's
journey.
right.
Really
Exactly.
interesting, actually. People miss it. It's like, this is so
Totally.
interesting and rich.
Exactly, totally. And once you start it, you can't give it up, you know.
Can't give it up.
Exactly right. Exactly.
The addiction changes.
That's right. No, exactly. Your fanaticism. So we're fanatic Buddhists, Bryson.
Yeah, I call Dharma junkies sometimes.
That's exactly right. Nothing wrong. I mean, that's the point of it's virtue and goodness and wisdom. How marvelous. Go for it, you know.
Have at it.
Yeah.
Venerable Ravin, thank you so much.
Okay.
Is there any final things you want to say, or is
Nothing, no. Just keep moving. Keep having confidence in your own amazing potential. This is the starting point. You've got to see your own potential. And this is what we mean, I think, in the West, we call it self-compassion. Buddha wouldn't call it that, but we can call it that. Self-compassion means knowing you have potential and knowing the sources of your pain and your happiness are inside you. So you better learn to know yourself well, become your own friend, and then never give up. And then you can help others. Then we can help others. That's it.
perfect?
Thank you, Bryson.